Chapter 2, Modern Historians of Ancient India. First topic, Colonialist Views and their contribution. Indians retained their traditional history in the form of handwritten epics, Puranas, and semi biographical works. Modern research in the history of ancient India began only in the second half of 18th century, that is 1750 onwards. This was to serve the needs of British colonial administration. As we know that after Battle of Plassey in 1757, following which Buxar Battle 1761, after that Bengal and Bihar came under the rule of East India Company. So East India Company found it difficult to administer Hindu law of inheritance. That's why in 1776 Manusmriti, the law book of Manu, was translated into Persian by Brahmin Pandits, and from Persian it was translated into English as a code of Gentoo laws. And this translation in English was done by Nathaniel Brassey Alhead. Pandits were associated with Britishers to administer Hindu civil law and Maulvis with Britishers to administer Muslim civil law. The initial efforts to understand ancient laws and customs, which continued largely until 18th century, resulted in the establishment in Calcutta in 1784 of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, which was set up by a civil servant of the East India Company, Sir William Jones. 1746 to 1904. He was the first one to suggest that Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek belonged to the same family of languages. He also translated the play known as Abhijnana Shakuntalam into English in 1789. Charles Wilkins. He was also an Orientalist. He translated Bhagavad Gita into English in 1785. Sir James Mackintosh. He founded in 1804 Bombay Asiatic Society. Henry Thomas Colebrook. He founded in 1823 Asiatic Society of Great Britain. William Jones emphasized that originally the European languages were very similar to Sanskrit and Iranian languages. This fostered European countries such as Germany, France, and Russia to take up Indological studies. During the first half of 19th century, chairs in Sanskrit were established in the UK and several other European countries. The greatest impetus to Indological studies was given by the German-born scholar F. Max Müller, 1823 to 1902, who was largely based in England. The revolt of 1857. Under him, the ancient scriptures were translated on massive scale, resulted into Sacred Books of the East series. Why so much of translation was required? First reason was revolt of 1857, where the Britishers felt the need to understand Indian society more betterly to administrate the areas easily, and Christian missionaries wanted to win converts, wanted to promote Christianity. That's why they wanted to translate ancient scriptures of India to understand the culture of Indians. These sacred books of the East series contain both Indian texts, Chinese and Iranian, but predominantly it had Indian texts. Mueller and other Western scholars made some generalizations about Indians, which helped them to justify colonial rule. These way, Indians lacked a sense of history, both in terms of time and chronology. Indians are accustomed to despotic rule and they are engrossed in problems of spiritualism or of the next world. They neither experienced a sense of nationhood nor self government. These generalizations can be found in book Early History of India written by Vincent Arthur Smith. In 1904 it was published. It was the first systematic history of ancient India. In this book he gave importance to political history, and this book served as textbook for 50 years and is still used by scholars. And his approach to history is pro-imperialist, and as a loyal member of Indian civil service, he emphasized the role of foreigners in ancient India in the book. And one third of the book contains content of Alexander's invasion only, and India is represented as a land of despotism, and no unity was experienced in India until British rule was established. He observes that autocracy is the only form of government which the historian of India is concerned about. So, British interpretations of Indian history helped justify colonial rule. A few of these observations appear to have some validity, but in earlier India, important events were dated with respect to death of Gautam Buddha. But if we compare to Chinese, Indians didn't show strong sense of chronology. The generalization that which said Indians were accustomed to despotic rule. This generalization was used to justify that role of viceroy is fit for Indian society, and Indians engrossed in problems of spiritualism and next world problems. This generalization was used to justify Britishers to look after this world, and Indians never experienced self government or nationhood was used to justify that Indians were incapable of governing themselves. These generalizations are exaggerated and used as good propaganda material. Next topic, nationalist approach and its contribution. All these generalizations came as a great challenge to Indian scholars, particularly to those who had received Western education. They were upset by the colonial distortions of their past history, and they were also upset by the fact contrast between decaying feudal Indian society and progressive capitalist society of Britain. So they took up the mission to reform Indian society and also to reconstruct ancient Indian history in such a way so as to make a case for social reforms and, more importantly, for self government. In doing so, most historians were guided by the nationalist ideas of Hindu revivalism. But there was no lack of scholars who adopted a rationalist and objective approach. First scholar, Rajendra Lal Mitra, 1822 to 91, he published some Vedic texts and wrote a book entitled Indo Aryans. He was a rationalist, a great lover of ancient heritage. He took a rational view of ancient society and produced a forceful tract to show that in ancient times people ate beef. Others sought to prove that caste system, in spite of its peculiarities, caste system is similar to class system based on division of labor found in Europe's pre-industrial and ancient societies. Next, Ramakrishna Gopal Bhandarkar, 1837 to 1925, and Vishwanath Kashinath Rajwade, 1869 to 1926. Both are from Maharashtra. Both reconstructed social and political history of India. Gopal Bhandarkar, he reconstructed especially Satavahanas of Deccan history and also history of Vaishnavism and other sects. He was a great social reformer also. He promoted widow remarriage and he was against caste system evils and also of child marriage. And Vishwanath Kashinath Rajwade, he had a great passion for research. He journeyed from village to village in Maharashtra in search of Sanskrit manuscripts and sources of Maratha history, and these sources of Maratha history were published in 20 volumes. He did not write much, but the history of the institution of marriage that he wrote in Marathi in 1926 continue to be a classic because of its solid foundation in Vedic and other texts, and also because of authors' insight into the stages in the evolution of marriage in India. Next, Pandurang Vaman Kane, 1882 1972, great Sanskritist and also a social reformer. In 20th century, he published History of the Dharma Shastra in 5 volumes, for which he received Bharat Ratna. It is an encyclopedia of ancient social laws and customs, which enables us to study social processes in ancient India. The Indian scholars carefully studied polity and political history to demonstrate that India did have a political history and that Indians possessed expertise in administration. Here, due credit should be given to Devdatta Ramakrishna Bhandarkar, 1875 to 1950. He was an epigraphist and he wrote books on Ashoka and also on ancient Indian political institutions. Next, Hemchandra Rai Chaudhary, 1892 to 1957. He reconstructed history of ancient India from the time of Mahabharata war, 10th century AD till Gupta period. He was a teacher of European history, but he didn't discuss problem of periodization in Indian history. Though he recognized the contribution of V. Smith, he criticized him as well, and his writings is marked by streak of militant Brahmanism as he criticizes Ashoka's policy of peace. Next, R.C. Majumdar. His writing is full of Hindu revivalism, and he is general editor of multi-volume publication, that is History and Culture of Indian People. Next, K.A. Neelkantha Shastri, 1892 to 1975. He is historian from South India. Most writers on early Indian history did not give adequate attention to South India. Even K. Neelkantha Shastri followed the same approach in his book A History of Ancient India, but this was rectified in his A History of South India. His style is lucid and crisp, and his observations on South India was criticized by many scholars, and he emphasized cultural supremacy of Brahmanas and also harmony in early Indian society. Under him, several research monographs were constructed on dynastic history of South India. What is monograph? It is a detailed study of a single specialized subject. Until 1960, political history attracted largest number of Indian scholars who also glorified the histories of their respective regions on dynastic lands. Those who wrote history at all India level were inspired by the ideas of nationalism. In contrast to Book of V.S. Smith, who devoted almost a third of total space to Alexander's invasion, Indian scholars gave this subject less importance. On the other hand, they stressed the importance of dialogue of Porus with Alexander and Chandragupta Maurya's liberation of northwestern India from Seleucus. Some scholars, such as K.P. Jaiswal (1881 to 1937) and A. Saltekar (1898 to 1959), overplayed the role of indigenous ruling dynasties in liberating India from the rule of Shakas and Kushans, little realizing that Central Asian and others became an intrinsic part of India's life and did not exploit the Indian resources for their original homeland like Britishers. K.P. Jaiswal is known for exploring the myth of Indian despotism. As early as 1910 to 12, he wrote several articles to show that republics existed in ancient India and enjoyed a measure of self government. His findings finally appeared in Hindu Polity in 1924. But his work was criticized by U.N. Ghoshal, 1886 to 1969. Coming to A. Saltekar, we already saw that they overlooked the contribution of Kushans, Shakas, treating them as outsiders. And coming to third topic, move towards non-political history. British historian A.L. Basham, 1814 to 1886, a Sanskritist by training, he had interest in materialistic philosophy of some heterodox sects. In 1951, his book published was The Wonder That Was India. It is a survey of ancient Indian culture and civilization, free from prejudices, unlike V.A. Smith's and other British writers. It is this book marks a great shift from political to non-political history. Next, D.D. Kosambi, 1907 to 1966. The same shift of from political to non-political history is evident in D.D. Kosambi's book, An Introduction to Study of Indian History. Later popularized in another work, The Civilization of Ancient India in Historical Outline, 1965. Kosambi developed a new path in Indian history. His treatment follows a materialist interpretation of history which is derived from writings of Karl Marx. He presents the history of ancient Indian society, economy, and culture as an integral part of development of forces and relations of production. His was the first survey volume to show the stages of social and economic development in terms of tribal and class processes. He was criticized by many scholars, including Basham, but his book continues to be widely read. Over the past 40 years, there has been a drastic change in the methods and orientation of those who work on ancient India. They lay greater stress on social, economic, and cultural processes and try to relate them to political developments. They take account of the stratification of the texts and compare their nature with archaeological data. All this fits well for the future of historical studies. Western writers, they no longer insist that all cultural elements came to India from outside. Some of them hold that religious ideas, rituals, caste, kinship, and tradition are the central forces in Indian history. They also underscore various divisive features which made for stagnation and are more concerned about the problem of stability and continuity. They seem to be fascinated by old exotic elements and want to preserve them forever. Such an approach implies that Indian society has now changed and cannot be changed. That stagnation is an integral part of Indian character. Thus, the chauvinists and sophisticated colonialists use the study of India's past to prevent its progress. A few Indian writers magnify the role of religion and believe that everything good and great originated in their country. Next topic, communal approach. Since 1980, some Indian writers and their Western counterparts have adopted an aggressive and irrational approach to the study of ancient India. They identify it with Hinduism. Under British rule, colonialist historians deliberately denigrated India's achievements and attributed important elements of Indian culture to external influence. Indian historians highlighted India's contribution to world culture. Hence, in the interpretation of history, there was a continuing struggle between colonialism and nationalism. Now, the situation has undergone a change. The struggle now is between communalism and irrationalism on the one hand, and rationalism and professionalism on the other hand. Though most of the writers are rational and professional, some have become communal and irrational. Those who have become communal and irrational overplay myths and legends, arguing for the existence of Rama's Ayodhya without historical evidence. They condemn all critical studies of Brahmanical social structure and even support the caste system by ignoring the social inequity stressed by Manu. These historians once attributed the painted grey beard to the Vedic people and looked for it outside India, now declare the Indo Aryans to be indigenous Indians. They argue that Muslims and Christians who came from outside are foreigners. Such generalizations need to be dispassionately examined on the basis of a rational reading of the resources. In the context of religion, neither Hindu nor Hindu Dharma is known to any ancient Sanskrit text, nor to any other ancient source. The communal writers go on harping on Hindu and Hindutva. Under the circumstances, historians, wedded to objective and scientific criteria, have to be allowed and adhere to reason and long established historical standards.